and I'll add a bit to that, because I don't think Craig's right on the button either, especially in a know where your rights forum where you want to be protecting yourselves. A, don't smoke dope and drive a car. B, the other concept to understand is the concept of reasonable suspicion. Because probable cause is what it takes for a police officer actually to bail you out of your car, put that neat yellow tape on the thing, sit you over on the side of the road, go get a warrant and toss that thing, including taking off the panels and doing anything to tear that car apart. That's probable cause. Reasonable suspicion is all a police officer needs to stop you to investigate a crime. And before I get to reasonable suspicion, I'll add one thing about probable cause. There's a case out there that talks about a mere probability. One of my favorite quotes when I'm writing briefs on the government side, a mere probability that that an item might be found in a certain place. Marijuana in the car, mere probability that a reasonable person might think is there. Reasonable suspicion, all is required there is articulable suspicion that a crime has been or is being committed or will be committed. Allows a police officer to stop you and question you, to investigate that suspicion. And the case was decided at the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, I don't know how many years ago, in a case called Terry versus Ohio. In the Terry case, two guys are on a street, I think in Los Angeles, and they keep walking past this jewelry store. And this police officer's walking them. One guy will walk past and he kind of looks at the jewelry store and he looks in, goes up to the corner, talks to his buddy, and then his buddy would come by, walk past the jewelry store, kind of look in, back up the street, talk to his buddy. They're conferring. Well, police officer, he's been a police officer for a long time, figures they're casing the joint to rob him. He goes up, he stops them, he detains them. He says, I'm going to stop you, and you can't go any farther. But before I do anything else, I'm going to frisk you for weapons. Guess what? He's got weapons. He's got probable cause? No. They're not breaking the law. They're not doing anything wrong per se. All they're doing is walking past a jewelry store and looking in the window. The Supreme Court says, yes, that's okay. They have reasonable suspicion to believe, based on this officer's experience, that they're casing the joint. Found a gun. Found a weapon on him. Guy got prosecuted for having a weapon on him. Supreme Court says no problem. Reasonable suspicion allows a police officer to pat someone down for weapons under those circumstances. And I think maybe the big picture lesson to take out of that is the Constitution says that the people shall be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. That doesn't necessarily mean probable cause is required all the time, because the Supreme Court, although they've made a probable cause or found a probable cause requirement in the Fourth Amendment, has carved out a long list of exceptions to the probable cause requirement. Like if there are exigent circumstances, and I think this little pamphlet talks about it, or maybe Jim talked about it in a newspaper article in the Kaiman I read from a couple weeks ago. If an officer's running through your apartment because he's chasing somebody, exigent circumstances. If there's a fire in your dorm room, and so they kick the door down to see what the fire's about, find your marijuana plants growing, guess what? That's okay. No probable cause, but it's all right. And there's a whole list of exceptions to the warrant requirement. So don't smoke dope and drive.
Well, and this brings up a good point of contrasting the federal Constitution with the state Constitution, because perhaps the Montana Supreme Court, if you were arrested by a city cop or a sheriff, they're not necessarily going to be bound by the Terry standard. What they're going to be bound by is the standard set by the Montana Supreme Court under the Montana Constitution. And actually, the Montana Supreme Court has looked at stops, has looked at reasonable suspicion, and has looked at probable cause, and given Montanans really broader protections in that area, don't you think? I think so, both with respect, for example, car stops, that's the one I'm familiar with. You guys know the interval cages, but car stops, you almost have to see a violation at the time you stop someone.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly, except that here's the thing for the citizens to understand, is that the courts give you certain protections depending on if you're a federal or state court. Just because an officer isn't a DEA officer, though, it's just a regular highway patrolman out on patrol doesn't mean that the patrolman is bound to the U.S. or to the state constitution over the U.S. Constitution. So suppose a patrolman is out on patrol, stops a guy for speeding, is suspicious that maybe something's going on because the guy's acting kind of weird, asks for consent to search. And consent, I think, is a place where the Montana Supreme Court gives greater protections than the U.S. Constitution does. He asks for consent. The guy says, yeah, okay, you can consent. Exception to the warrant requirement, or exception to the warrant requirement. We don't need probable cause. The guy said it's consenting, it's okay. Trooper opens up the back of the rig, and guess what? He's got 30 keys of cocaine. Does the Montana Constitution protect him when the case lands on my desk in federal court? No. Now we're in the federal Constitution. You're not going to get the protections, even though it's a Montana Highway Patrolman who stopped you. Even though that case might get thrown out in state court, it's not going to get thrown out in federal court.
That's a really good point. It's not necessarily the officer, you're right, it's the crime committed. That's a good point.
Hey, you want to know what the police are going to do? If we just now go down the hallway, we're just going to knock on your door and ask. We're not going to come in and arrest anybody. We're not going to come in and search. We're going to ask. We've got a reason to be there, got a reason to ask, but as far as we're concerned, we're not going to go any further without more information. Just on smell.
What if we say no? Maybe we don't have it.
That's a good question. What if we say no? You're exerting your right. So we'll say, okay, see you later.
What if they don't answer the door? If they say nothing, they just really quiet in the dorm room?
Again, if you don't answer the door, if you say no, I don't have any dope, you can't come in, I don't want to talk to you anymore, those things are fine. Now, in the university system, understand that the dorm has some a hammer over you though, because you still have to deal with the administration of the dorm. So they may still write you for student conduct, but we're gone.
Although, Jim, will your officers stand and engage the person in conversation like, what do you mean, no? I can smell it.
Oh, absolutely. We'll have the discussion. I mean, if you know, we ask you, have you been smoking dope and your tongue is green and your eyes are glazed over, we're going to dispute the point, but if you don't come up with any product, if you're not willing to go any further, if we don't see any further evidence, then we're going to turn it over to the RAs and let them write the student down.
What happens if you have a situation where you suspect somebody's dealing dope out of their dorm room? You go, you knock, and they answer the door, and you can smell it, and you suspect there is a much greater crime going on than just personal use. You would have the opportunity to use that information to try to get a warrant, right?
Absolutely. In that case, that's what we would do.
Okay.
Seal up the room and go ahead and apply for the warrant. But generally, when we're talking about smell cases, we're talking about smell wafting down the hallway because the towel under your door and the fan into the window didn't do the job. So, so we're going to be knocking on the